so we're off. I'm with yet again the wonderful, the great Scott Worcester. I think this is number 18 for us.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I believe I checked the stats. I think we've passed 700 downloads. So someone out there is listening to us rambling on about health and hopefully getting healthier for it.
That's awesome. I really like that.
So there's that. The system works. My super best friend, separate to you, mate. Who
thank you.
bought me coffee. Yeah. So good timing, Abe. Save the day. Two super best friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would, but I'm a little far away.
He just bought me a coffee. It's might be a bit cold by the time we get it to you, mate.
I have green tea.
You're so healthy.
Well, unfortunately for me, I can't do coffee. Like 10 o'clock's probably the latest I can do coffee.
Are you a slow metabolizer?
I'm a slow metabolizer for coffee, as it turns out. So,
so I've got that glorious, quick metabolism of coffee. So, I find anything. You're not so sure. Well, yeah, from the point of my adrenals, I probably shouldn't be drinking coffee.
No.
But for the sake of life as we know it, I probably should. But you were, mate. So let's get into it. You were having trouble with the glorious state of Queensland's laws on radiation.
Yeah, as it turns out, that wonderful device that you have.
Interfering.
Yes, that wonderful device you have, the K laser. For me to have it in Queensland, or my ASA laser, which is they're both class 4s, requires that I run the gauntlet of Queensland Department of Health and specifically radiation health, and you have to go through a series of multiple different licenses, including a license to possess and a license to acquire and a license to use and a license to have your room inspected every year, and all of these,
each of which has a price attached to it.
It does, and it costs about $1,000 a year to keep yourself accredited. Now, as it turns out, I had my paperwork lost by the department, and 6 months later, they rocked up and said, here, look, signed it all off. We couldn't find the paperwork, and so sign this and we'll get it all done. And a couple of days later, some certificates, etc., turned up, and so I clearly thought I had the right to possess a laser, and so I went ahead and bought it and paid for it. $55,000 later, and for the last 2 years they've been accrediting me. This year they said, "Oh, no, we don't have an inventory number for you and a license to acquire. You're actually in contravention of the law." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I've got X, Y. No, that's the wrong one. You're actually at risk of just short of a $253,000 fine.
Oh, well, if you do get the license to acquire, are they going to credit you for the monies that they've been taking off you for the last 2 years?
No, because
even though inappropriately.
No, those ones were appropriately assuming that I had the license. So they're willing to forgo a lot of that. The problem with it that I take umbrage with is I've thought I've been compliant, and in their documentation to me, they've said, "Well, we're willing to, as long as you give us the right paperwork now, we'll waive the fact that you've been non-compliant, but we will note it down, and it will be used against you potentially." For future acquisitions of licenses. I'm like, yeah, but I haven't unintentionally. I thought I was complying exactly. You guys lost my paperwork, so a 6-week process took over 6 months to deal with, and so I don't.
Red tape.
Well, it is, and ultimately it'll all be okay, but it does make me less inclined to want to continue with the Class 4 laser.
So is it just, it's the Class 4?
It's only the Class 4.
3s are okay?
Correct. Anything under a 4 is fine.
So have you been not using your laser?
I've not been using my Class 4 in the last week because I have Class 2s to play with.
Ah, gotcha. So I since getting my laser, 2-3 months ago.
Yep.
And in the glorious state of New South Wales, the wild, wild west, where we don't have as much bureaucracy as the sunny state. This gadget has saved my bacon more than one time.
Yeah.
Where I've done every other trick known to man, and how's that back pain? It's exactly the same as it was before. You haven't done anything.
Yep.
It's like, oh, okay, we better zap it.
Yep.
And then that gets Not to mention that speeds up healing by 40%. So
yeah.
That's nice.
Totally get it.
To not use that as part of your armament, mate, that'd be like losing a limb.
Well, it would, but fortunately, right at the same time, my Class 2 lasers had turned up, and so they're running at 405 and 635 nanometer wavelengths, and so I've got an ultraviolet laser, which I desperately wanted because that's the frequencies that is shown to knock out bacterial infection, viral load, and things like candida and yeast in the system. So from the sort of patients that I tend to attract, including people with PANS and PANDAS, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder acquired by strep, candidal infections, chronic fatigue syndromes. They're very either infectious, viral load, or otherwise. So, unfortunately, as much as I love my Class 4, it doesn't have an ultraviolet laser. So I can't do with the Class 4 what I can do with my lower powered Class 2. So,
and with a 634 Class 2 laser, so I'm guessing you're still using that for musculoskeletals?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's...
Okay, now, mate, the golden question.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any difference between results from a Class 2 to a Class 4? And I can tell by the look on your face that not really.
If anything, to be fair, I actually think my results are better.
Oh, okay. That's convincing.
Well, I was actually quite surprised because what I was expecting is that it was going to take me longer to do things simply because it's lower power, and that's not been the case whatsoever. And
I shall have to revisit my thoughts on the... mate, I do love the sound of that class, the violet laser.
The EVRLs are awesome.
I mean, everything from that you mentioned, but I'd imagine like acne in kids.
I've been treating that. I've been treating it in patients, including, one of the convincing things that I know that it works is that I happened to treat my daughter's forehead for acne because it was annoying her and it was sore. And the next day, she begrudgingly said via her mother, can you get Dad to bring the laser home again and treat me? Because it worked.
That thing, okay.
It literally cleared up all her skin in like 24, 48 hours. So I know it's definitely doing its thing.
I'd imagine that would also be helpful for, would it penetrate deep enough for leaky gut?
It does. And again, it's showing...
You're treating everything with that laser from acne to eczema to leaky gut to IBS to, Jesus, the list goes on. Be
And again, unfortunately, it's not the frequencies in the higher powered laser. And while the higher powered laser, as yours does, yours goes between that 600 right the way up, the absorption point is really good around the 600s and really good at 800 and 900. And so while I can't get up to the top end with the Class 2s, I am still getting that lower frequency. And, I'm still only taking 2 to 5 minutes, which is what I was taking with the high-powered laser anyway. So, I'm reading a whole lot more stuff, as you're quite well aware. And the Russian data really stands on its own basis, basically going, well, why are you guys in the West complicating stuff by getting so very, very high powered? Because it has that hormesis effect. And again, they've got nothing to lose by, making an investigation. They're not financially invested. All the laser companies who are doing the most of the research, unfortunately, have something to win by saying, look, ours is the best. And, the research is there.
Frustrating from that because it's like a pharmaceutical company where you're publishing the results that you want to see to make them buy the gadget that they happen to be selling.
Yeah.
And I suppose, it's weird when you can say, in this case, trust the Russians.
unless you're Mueller. Yeah.
Who would have thought? Communism for the win.
Yeah.
But so I mean, I've started to dip my toe in the research field for the violet laser.
Yep.
And I'm liking what I'm seeing. But is it all? Based off what you're telling me about your daughter's forehead, It sounds like it's as effective as what the papers are claiming it to be.
I'm hesitant because obviously one of the reasons why I'm very interested in it is that my eldest daughter, who's high-functioning autistic, has pandas. And so we've been treating her with antibiotics on and off for 6-7 years, and every so often it comes back. Now, my observation since I've been starting to transcranially treat her with the ultraviolet and with the class 2s is that her speech clarity is greater, her how to put it rudely, her functionality as a normal human being seems better. Her ability to interrelate and get social cues in the last week has gone up fairly substantially. And I was treating her with the class 4 previously anyway. There definitely seems to be a difference. Yeah.
That's exciting. That's got to be pretty magical from your point of view, seeing your little girl light up in front of you.
Absolutely. And so hence the reason why, I was massively invested in the class 4. I honestly am now leaning towards this idea that the Russians have put out there that it's not really the power, it's the frequency and frequency. And how you apply it. And like some of the work that I've been doing with trying to do muscle strengthening, muscle calibration, literally takes 10 to 30 seconds to get a muscle to strengthen up.
Interesting.
And so
I'll have to
play with that one.
Have to grab those settings off you, mate.
Yep.
But mate, class 4's out because of stupid rules, but at least you've got the class 2s to play with, which sound like they're doing amazing things. So you're not completely laserless.
No, I'm kind of happy.
Which is good to hear. Good to hear. Mate, I had the super fun time of trying to explain to a patient, which is weird when it comes from a chiropractor, because they should be hearing this stuff off their GP. But when I was trying to explain to a patient who had just had a heart issues, and we're getting some occlusion, and said, you've got to stay away from fats, and it's trying to explain that cholesterol isn't from fats, it's from sugars and bloody carbs. So, mate, do you want to run through that story again, because it's just a fun one to it's weird when the common perception amongst everyone is that it's it's that eggs and the fatty bit on a steak that's going to kill you, when it's really not. It's the insulin resistance, bloody stress, inflammation, and all the other crap. Mate, talk me through it. How do we get plaques building up in our coronary arteries?
Fundamentally, the answer to that is always down to inflammation. So the inflammation and free radical oxidative stress floats through the system, and the free radicals basically will rip a stabilizing electron off any tissue they can come up against. So all of your tissue, therefore, is a antioxidant in one way, shape, or form. Since the cardiac tissue has the greatest demand for blood supply apart from the brain, the greatest amount of blood circulation goes to both the brain and the heart. And because of that oxidative stress actually, of course, is going to spend the most time in those tissues. Therefore, it will rip electrons off the intima, which, if your healing capacity is slower than we'd ideally like it to be, that's going to create intrinsic damage to that smooth lining of your actual blood vessels. And so that smooth lining being damaged will, of course, run us some problems. Now, the triglycerides and cholesterols and fats that float around in your bloodstream will, as they basically run through, they can get stuck to those little intrinsic pockets, little dimples in the intimal lining. And so that damage, as it kind of is running through it, kind of smears across the surface and will actually start to create a plaque at that moment. Now, complicating matters further. The more glucose running around in your bloodstream, the more what are called GAGs, glycosaminoglycans, and AGEs, which is end products of glycation. So these build long chains of sugar onto tissue. Now, we specifically look at this, as we've spoken about, in red blood cells, but in the rest of the tissue, especially in the capillary beds, the AGEs and glycosaminoglycans, etc., will bind to your tissue and make cross-linking long chains that the immune system will come along and go, aha, you're really old tissue. I need to kill you because you shouldn't be there with that much cross connections. And that then sets off a repair cycle. And that repair cycle may create scar tissue, and the scar tissue, being slightly rougher, will again smear fats on it. And the more fat running through your bloodstream, the more the turbulence gets created, and then we get aneurysms starting to be created and narrowing of the artery, and the laminar flow goes. Now, from there, what we're talking about is the fat in the bloodstream. So everyone kind of thinks about the saturated fat floating around from eating that kind of rind of the rump steak or the bacon, etc. But the majority of what we actually consume that becomes that fat, the triglycerides, actually comes from easily consumable carbohydrates. So when we eat something, all of our meals become the smallest possible constituent components. So in the case of like a potato, that potato gets broken down from its starch into its smallest glucose molecules and absorbed. And then from that absorption gets converted into what's called a triglyceride. So a triglyceride is a glycerol group and with long chains of sugars, which become, so the carbon residues turn into what's called a lipid, so to speak, at that moment. And you convert and transport triglycerides around the body because these are the energy molecules that gets transported on top of what we consider cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is a transport vessel. Now, in of itself, let's clear up that misnomer. Cholesterol is a steroid ring that is a precursor to manufacturing steroid hormones in the body. And it's manufactured by your liver to support you to make, progesterone and DHEA and testosterone, etc., as well as vitamin D. Now, that steroid ring can then be bound to a lipoprotein, including, high-density lipoprotein, low-density lipoprotein, and very low-density lipoprotein, which are transport vesicles to help move triglycerides from the liver to the muscles. Now, the more triglycerides floating around in the bloodstream, and the longer the vesicle, like the LDL, is floating around, the more oxidized it becomes and the more oxidative stress and stickiness occurs, and that sets off damaging cascades and inflammatory molecules, which is ultimately what leads to the true plaquing and blocking of the arteries. So in a really roundabout way, what it comes...
crazy little bugger running around with a torch lighting fires as often as he possibly can.
Pretty much. And the best way of defeating it is, of course, keep your saturated fat moderate, but you need saturated fat because it's essential for your brain and it's essential for making cholesterol in the first place. Without enough cholesterol, you can't make all of your steroid hormones. And if you can't make your steroid hormones, you can't repair. You can't make fun things like vitamin D. Without vitamin D, you can't run a thyroid or run an immune system or, repair your skin or do a bunch of different things that are critically important. So unfortunately, as it turns out, and wait for the calls of conspiracy, back in the 50s, the sugar lobby worked out that they were actually the bad guys in this situation, and they paid some very clever Harvard professors to actually publish documentation saying that fat was the bad guy and sugar was fine. And that's been the basis of the whole damn thing. And it's really been only in the last couple of years that people have actually started to properly publish research saying that that's a total load of twaddle. And, it's just gone through in this last year an entire lawsuit. Professor Noakes in South Africa took the Dietetics Association, or they took him to court. I forget which way it actually went. Basically, he refused to capitulate, saying that their teachings were wrong and basically telling everyone to eat high-grain carbohydrates and lots of things that convert into sugar was not the right way, and them demonizing fat was bad. And they basically told him his research was rubbish. And unfortunately, the full Supreme Court in South Africa sided in favor of a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet and not with the standard dietetic fare. However, the problem is that we have this really incumbent concept. Like, I get asked all the time by patients, but what about the cholesterol in eggs, as I'm telling them to eat more of them? And we've spent 20 years, it was debunked that eggs were bad for us. Yet it's still part of the consciousness of our public. Oh, no, I wouldn't want to push my cholesterol up because, well, do you know what? When we eat eggs, it actually decreases the need for cholesterol production. It's proven. Now, what gets really trippy is...
eat more eggs to get rid of your cholesterol.
That's it. That's pretty much it.
Some people are going to find that super controversial.
Yeah, when you get to it, though, it gets more controversial when you start eating vast amounts of plant fibers and end up on like a vegetarian vegan diet, because plant sterols are plant cholesterol. So you can upset your cholesterol balance by eating vast amounts of vegetables.
Well, that's why I choose to eat meat and not be a vegan.
Well,
one of the million reasons.
Yeah.
But,
as it comes down to, if you don't eat enough plant matter, you're going to get into trouble. If you don't eat enough protein, you're going to get into trouble. If you don't have enough of the right fats, omega-3s and saturated fat and cholesterol in your body, you're going to get into trouble. If you don't have enough minerals and vitamins, you're going to get into trouble. Basically, there's no one thing that's really right or really wrong. Everything's omnivorous. However, one of the few things that you can take to the bank is if you eat a highly processed diet, processed sugars, processed fats, processed carbs, processed anything, you're going to get into trouble. Even kind of nature's candy, that stuff called bacon, if you have the highly processed stuff, you're going to get into trouble. The nitrates and there's arguments out there that says nitrates are natural. Well, some of them are. There are naturally occurring nitrates in celery. But sodium nitrate doesn't work in the same way, and it makes nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are massively cancer-causing. So the nitrate binds to your amino acids in the protein and will signal the immune system to actually knock it out. And the inflammatory cascades kick on from there.
Yeah, so essentially, if you get the high cholesterol in your diet talk by your GP, make sure you talk to a nutritionist or someone who's up to date. Look, there are some GPs that are still behind the times on that, but I think some of them are starting to crawl out of the.
Well, it gets really trippy. I've got these fun ones where I've got a patient coming in. They live kind of in a place called Wandai, and Wandai is an hour and a half out west from where I am now, and His lab out there, Sullivan Nicolaides, says that 7.5 for cholesterol is the top end of the limit. Whereas I've got patients in the local vicinity to here, which is a higher affluent area, that anything above 5.5 would get them tagged by their GP for needing statins at that moment in time. And I find that really quite fascinating. We go half an hour
range difference.
Yeah, it is. It's huge, and there's no justification for it. The only thing I can see is, since all these people have high cholesterol, well, we'll just average it out for this population of people. Now, I just want to see us set some basic garden ground rules. Anything above 6.5 we've got to be a bit concerned about, because it's not that the 6.5 or the 7.5 or the 5.5 is actually the issue. What it would say, though, is that if your number is up there, there's probably either inflammation, hormonal imbalance, or something happening that means you're not using your cholesterol appropriately. It could be that your diet is just trash and you're living on, high fructose corn syrups and large amounts of fast food. And in which case, you're going to get a greater amount of these cholesterol molecules moving the fats around, because you got to have them, because they transport the energy.
Don't treat the cholesterol. Find out what the cholesterol's the indicator for.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So when I looked at...
If inflammation's causing the cholesterol, there's no point just treating the cholesterol.
That's it.
Get that inflammation under control.
It always comes down to that.
It's a crazy world.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what we then have to look at is, what are the effects of electromagnetic radiation frequencies on us? There's papers coming out that suggest that EMF is actually a lot to do with the cause of a lot of the damage and oxidative stress going on in your tissue. So if you think about it, EMF...
That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But just reverse the thought process. What EMF do you use on a regular basis to help people? Light.
Oh, laser.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So EMF affects us all the time. Just some of them are harmful, some of them are helpful. So what it comes down to is that some of the frequencies from things like, LED, so light-emitting diode displays, may actually be kind of harmful to our system. How many LEDs are you around?
Ugh.
Yeah.
A kabillion.
Yeah, and so the wiring in your walls at 50 hertz frequency in most places, and it runs through a resistance capacitor called an LED or a light bulb or a computer screen or whichever thing you've got, and it sets off a harmonic frequency. Some of those might not be as good for us as we'd like to believe. The telephone communications, they're talking about some of the impacts of this 5G, and that we're going to see negative impacts up the kablooey from it.
Well, because I know Dr. Brandon Brock, who, if you're listening to this and you don't know who Brandon Brock is, feel free to Google him. He is a phenomenal practitioner in the States. Scotty and I have been following him for a while. But when he was down in Sydney recently, he was mentioning that he was about to either publish a paper or co-author a paper looking at EMF and the link with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, where TBI made you more susceptible to things like the routers and so on. Were definitely a factor there.
Would not surprise me.
Which is interesting because it's still one of those public perceptions that the moment you say, "Oh, I need an EMF blocker," and you immediately say, "Oh, you're one of those
tinfoil." Yeah.
And then it'll be probably you dare to say that cholesterol is caused by inflammation. Is you're a tinfoil hat if you were 20 years ago. But,
absolutely.
These days, people are actually starting to listen. So maybe in another 15 years, people will say, "Oh yeah." Those EMF is actually quite bad for you. People will catch up sooner or later. The data will show that we're right, mate. Sooner or later,
the data will show that we're right. The problem is that we're so dependent on the data, and I use that pun very loosely. Yeah. We're so connected to everything. Like, do you want to give up your flat screen TV? Or your cell phone, or your, laptop? I don't.
difficult to live life without one.
Absolutely.
Well, I suppose if you were to go back to the days of the good old, you remember the TVs when they were like 4 foot deep?
Yeah, cathode ray ones. Those things are actually worse.
I was about to say those things have got to be, and just the hours that I used to spend plastic in front of those as a kid.
Yeah, but your eyes aren't square.
Yeah, I'll have to see when iPads made a jump into the scene.
But you know what?
I think there's certain things that we can't get away from. But I suppose it's if we are going to get exposed to this much EMF radiation and it's causing inflammatory issues, know how to know if your body's telling you it's inflamed and know what to do about it.
Well, see, from Brandon's point of view, stuff I've been looking at, and I think mentioned before, for things like PTSD, one of the best treatments for it's actually hyperbaric oxygen, low level, and you just do repetition of it. And so one of the benefits of it is you're stuck in a chamber for an hour.
Yeah,
and nothing.
No
yeah, absolutely. It's meditative. Plus, you're soaking the person's body in significantly more oxygen, and that's shown to actually decrease brain inflammation. So there are solutions out there. We just have to look at where they are. And one of the benefits of some of these things, like laser, like hyperbaric oxygen, like cryo, is that they're general. You don't actually have to get really hell-bent on exactly which pathway, because they're shown to stimulate the whole body rather than just
everything up.
Yeah. And I really like that because, someone comes in for one problem and you can help a slew of other things at the same time.
Yeah, you're not just using the hyperbaric to get rid of that little bit of DOMS in their quads. You're also helping the inflammation that's setting off. Well, actually, mate, this might be quite a good segue into one of the papers that I wanted to talk to you about.
Nice.
Well done. Well done us for accidentally stumbling across the thing that we wanted to talk about second up. So I came across a paper titled, Could Depression Be an Immune Response to Stress? A new study suggests an answer. Very dramatic.
Yes.
Although when you write a title like that, then I'm pretty sure you know what the answer is based on the title. But anyway. They were showing that I think they got a bunch of mice and exposed them to stress, and surprise, surprise, they got depressed, and they found that a particular part of the brain, being the medial prefrontal cortex, was atrophying. And when you get atrophy in that part of your brain, it can cause depressive behavior, which is no good for you. And then they also had a bunch of mouse that they desensitized to stress genetically, and then exposed them to that same stressful event, so that they didn't have the same level of cortisol and cytokines released by that stressful event. And surprise, surprise, they didn't get the depression. So they were looking at stress causing an immune response causing atrophy of the prefrontal cortex. And we were having again a very brief chat about this before, because this paper talks about the release of cytokines causing being involved with the inflammation in the brains, but essentially cytokines can't really cross the blood-brain barrier, and it'd be more the stressful event super activating your lymphatic and your microglial systems.
Quite likely. It will, like the stress and cortisol release will, of course, punch holes in barriers, and it causes the connections and the gap junctions and tight junctions to leak. So cortisol in itself will, and the stress response, cause leaking of the gut and cause inflammatory particles to get into the bloodstream, but it's also shown to create inflammation that will cause the blood-brain barrier to leak. So the question mark is always still chicken and or egg in that scenario. And, I'm not as convinced, because what we know is that people who have poorer sensitivity to cortisol get more depressed. Okay? So that's a receptor-driven thing, and it's actually programmed from birth. So if the mum has highly stressful events during the pregnancy, the child can either be hypersensitive to cortisol or hyposensitive to cortisol, depending on how their body dealt with the response. So if during that pregnancy, that hyper-stressful situation turned down their cortisol receptors, they're going to actually be less receptive to stress, or less receptive to cortisol rather, and this can have a very different outcome. So the problem with the paper is bias. You know, you're going into that with a preconceived idea of what stress actually is, and therefore you're going, right, well, we're expecting to see this, and therefore we're going to see that, and we're writing a paper at the end result of it. But it's a bit more complex than that. Is it inflammation is damaging the vagus nerve, which is feeding back? Is it that inflammation is damaging the mesencephalon, and that's altering the firing of serotonin? And or is it problems in the lower body feeding back up into the brain because of the inflammation? And it's got nothing really to do with inflammation in the brain. We were just biased to find it. As I say,
I suppose that's one of those complicated, depression being a complicated thing that can go on, that there are many roads that lead to Rome.
Well, I just think we are looking at it far too much from the we believe depression is to do with serotonin, and serotonin, we can make a drug to increase or lower it. And so we've built a model of depression based very much on the serotonin molecule rather than it being a network-driven, body-driven thing. And so I like the concept of the paper that says that inflammation attacks the network and therefore causes depression. But how it will get interpreted is the word depression is associated with SSRIs and serotonin, and right, so all we need to do is make a more effective anti-inflammatory molecule and voila, depression gone, rather than looking at a much more global situation. Because if you take that to its greater extrapolations, as I was talking about with Megan and pandas, you know, pandas, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder acquired by strep, creates an autoimmune antibody that is shown to attack the brain. Gluten can cause an autoimmune antibody that attacks different portions of the brain. And so the autoimmune antibody is attacking the brain, creating the inflammation. If you damage your cerebellum enough, you are much more prone to depression. Now, why is that? Because the cerebellum feeds to which portion of the brain?
All of it.
Yeah.
Mesencephalon, frontal lobes, limbic system.
But in this particular instance, the major feedback loop I want you to say is the prefrontal cortex.
Ah, yes.
Okay.
I didn't read my cue, sorry.
But so is the atrophy in those prefrontal cortexes that we're attributing to the depression actually the thing, or is that because of the damage actually hitting the cerebellum?
Yeah, that's causing the atrophy.
Correct.
Flow on.
And so if you get inflammation damaging the neuromuscular tissue, which decreases the feedback loop to the cerebellum, it's going to have a decline in the loop going to the frontal, isn't it?
Well, I suppose, yeah, we're circling back to the probably theme of the podcast: treat the cause, not the symptom.
Absolutely.
So if the problem's neuromuscular, treat that. Don't treat the depression in the prefrontal cortex if that's not your original loop. Otherwise, you're just going to do a lot of prefrontal activation only to turn around and 3 seconds later, surprise, surprise, your depression's come back.
Yeah, well, I see it quite commonly, sadly. And so that's kind of where a lot of my tendency will be to almost overwhelm, and I've got to work on that. I've got to try and get more structure to how I deal with people so that they don't get so overwhelmed. But you can't just do brain-changing exercises, and this is why I'm really loath to have a great degree of faith in we've got the handheld iPod games, etc., that luminosities and stuff like that, and they're like, do your brain-changing exercises. Yeah, I think the brain's a bit more complex than just kind of stiff.
It's not just. On that, did you ever play a game called Portal?
Well, I haven't personally, but I've heard of it.
Because there was a study where they compared people playing the Lumosity brain development app to people playing Portal, which is quite a complicated 3D puzzler with so you shoot a hole in one wall and a hole in another wall. You run through wall A and you come out wall B. So that's essentially but there's all sorts of tricky mechanics. But they found at the end of so the same amount of time spent playing Lumosity as playing Portal 2 resulted in just as much brain activation and increase in plasticity and so on. So both things inevitably made you smarter. One of which costs, I think, about $12 now because it's a really old game, and the other of which costs about $20 a month ongoing. So,
right,
choose wisely. But again, that in and of itself is not going to be the be all and end all for these sorts of things.
And again, I raise that horrifying question of just because we altered plasticity, did it actually enhance the survivability of the network as a whole, or did you just light up parts? Because, again, I could probably light up those parts by giving you cocaine. which on a scan will definitely show up the parts lighting, but may not enhance your survivability.
You'd have a very expensive treatment consult cost. But I'd imagine to a certain clientele you would be very popular.
There wasn't really going to go down that as a viable solution, but it does raise some interesting questions from my point of view, which is, we run these tests and scans, and we've got, the person avidly being addicted to the blue screen light, playing their luminosity or playing Portal, etc. And so you've got that dopaminergic light up going on. Is that really transferable as to say that that's actually plasticity, or are you actually just upregulating kind of a addictive capacity for dopaminergic release?
Well, yeah, I think I'm finding the same thing because I have used the Lumosity app and it's similar like iPad apps from a brain stimulating point of view for to be honest, most of my kid population, it's hard to get them to do anything more complicated than play on iPad these days. So it's just like, okay, just play the iPad game because that will help. But inevitably, you see improvements in scores on these specific iPad games. But then you say, okay, great. How's the school concentration span, or how's the anxiety levels go?
Yeah.
And they're exactly the same. So you might be increasing plasticity in that one specific bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have a flow-on effect and affect the brain function for other areas.
Yeah, CrossFit or BJJ for the win, I think, is the way forward there.
Oh, mate, I started, I had my first gi BJJ sessions last week.
Yep.
And it was so much fun to put on some angry pajamas and wrestle some other guys.
Fantastic.
But you should have told me that I needed to strap up the top of I've got blisters on the bloody top of my feet instead of the bottom. It is still running. And I was looking at them and I'm like, oh, shit, I need that violet laser so I can make sure I don't get a bloody
skin infection
or something.
Yeah.
So, maybe that. But yeah, I can see how the problem solving while you're in a
absolutely
with someone sitting on you. Okay, I've got to think this through, and that's BJJ, CrossFit, any sort of high intensity training that's got weights with it. You're gonna be a good long-term healthy option for brain activation.
I tend to think so. I had actually a lot of fun last week. I had our friend Hayden up from Melbourne, and he came and played with me on Wednesday night at Jiu-Jitsu. And he has...
Tell me you tapped him, mate. Did you tap him?
I did.
Yes.
That wasn't really the point.
Tag him in this podcast when we edit, when we put it out live.
That's not really the point. It was awesome fun. Like, it was really nice for me because he's slightly taller, he's slightly heavier than I am. He's around the same skill. He's a 4-stripe white belt. He's come up the ranks really quickly. He's good and strong, and I could just kind of go at it, so to speak. Like, at my gym, I've either got bigger, heavier more skilled, like purple and brown belts to play against, or I've got smaller, lighter people either of similar skill or higher. So I either have to try and restrict what I do or survive. Whereas with Hayden, it was awesome. It was one of the best roles that I've had, just simply because didn't have to be worried about anything. I could just concentrate on him, be in the moment, and things went to plan for me.
It sounds awfully meditative for you, mate. That's brilliant.
It was lovely actually having him up. It's nice to have friends actually come visit. No one comes to visit Brisbane. Everyone.
You're too bloody far away, mate. It's, I'm pretty sure I'm going to win the $50 million lotto over the weekend. So I'll set up a super clinic in Sydney and then just I'll force you to come down here a couple of days a week.
Cool. No, I'm all for that. That'll be fun.
We'll make it happen. Mate, I just wanted to circle back quickly because I know we've touched on this briefly again, but I wanted to go over it again. When you were talking about so when you were a bub in the oven, and Mum was exposed to a stressful event, and you either develop a super sensitivity to cortisol or a super insensitivity to cortisol.
Sure.
With the super sensitivities to cortisol, that's going to prime you, I'm guessing, for things like anxiety, or people that are more prone to that flight and fright, as opposed to going shut down in the presence of a stressful event.
That's absolutely appears to be the case. So
it's the low sensitivity people that are generally going to be your better Navy SEALs and soldiers, and people that will either don't react to stress or have a shutdown moment.
Well, they all react to stress. So no matter what, everyone reacts to it. Some are naturally requiring more stimulus to actually get a response out of their system. So these are the people who are what you'd call, say, adrenaline junkies, jump off a cliff, base jumpers, motorcycle riders, all sorts of things like that.
Seekers. Gotcha.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then there is the ones who will commit road rage because their brain's so under-sensitized that they actually require something they pull up, beat the tar out of someone at the traffic light and toddle off like nothing had ever happened, because for a short period of time their brains actually feel quite normal, because the big jolt of adrenaline, noradrenaline into the system actually makes their neurons connect appropriately.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, the other end of the scale is that they've made vastly more receptors, and therefore, if you've got significantly more receptors and significantly more sensitivity, then a tiny amount will give you a much bigger jolt. And these people also can be really, really, really vigilant. And so this is part and parcel of, I think, that ADD, ADHD cascade, because if you've got significantly more receptors, they might be perfectly normal. A smaller amount of stimuli will give you a much bigger degree of vigilance. And so this is where we have to do, brain retraining, go, no-go activity to try and enhance the brain's ability to inhibit itself so it doesn't keep going, what is it? What is it? What is it? And because it's all about survival. And it's only when we kind of look at things from that very survival point of view, actually going, why is the person doing it? What's their behavioral payoff? Because everything's got to be about enhancing the organism's ability to survive in the environment. And so if you went back 50,000 years, that hypersensitivity, that vigilance would keep you alive. Ooh, I saw something creeping through the grass. It's a tiger, it's protective. Now, that might have worked well 50,000 years ago, but now when you've got these kids sitting in a classroom, as soon as someone 2 feet over from them moves an elbow, moves a pen, bang, what is it? And their focus is pulled away from what they're actually meant to be looking at and straight to the elbow or the hand movement, or, someone's writing on the blackboard and they can't actually kind of get to what they're meant to do because they keep moving their hand.
So the flow on from therapy for those guys would be the go no go, anything that encourages slowing down of the brain. So meditation is one of the good at homes. Any sort of cold exposure, parasympathetic activation. That's all well and fun stuff. But from a supplement point of view, Is there a thing? What would you recommend for people to try and slow down? And this is like I'm obviously winding up for you to recommend Brain Down, but also from the mum point of view, is there certain supplements you would recommend for a mum to be to take to try and help her minimize the sort of stress load that she's having on bub?
Sure. So there's several things that I'd look at. One of which is I'd utilize a activated B complex with activated folate and activated B12. So methyl B12 and 5'-methyl tetrahydrofolate or folinic acid in it, as against the folic acid.
And is that for mums or for supervigilant ADD, ADHD?
It's actually for both, but specifically in this instance, I'm talking about the mum, because we provide methylation cofactors prior to the pregnancy and during the pregnancy. We have a greater ability to actually methylate and close off inappropriately exposed DNA. So we can actually inhibit the expression of certain genes that might not otherwise need to be being expressed at that moment in time. Okay, so that's always a good idea. Again, in her instance, we can also use a thing called alpha GPC or alpha glycerylphosphocholine. Now, this particular nutrient helps make phosphocholine, phosphatidylserine, phosphatidylinositol. So it makes your phospholipids, which are neurotransmitter cell signaling devices. They help enhance memory. They help to make acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is, of course, a neurotransmitter for the parasympathetic nervous system. And if we enhance production of that, we're going to get a calming down of behavior. It's shown to blunt the effect of adrenaline in the system. So when someone's really hyped up, either the child or the parent, we're going to find that that's going to be helpful. It also is shown to help tighten up your gap junctions and tight junctions in the gut and in the brain. So it's going to decrease the inflammation and help glue your barriers back up, which is always going to be particularly useful.
And that was the GPC?
That's GPC. That's one of the reasons why we use it.
I didn't realize it was had a neurosignaling component to it. I thought
Massive.
I was just taking it for anti-inflammatory.
No.
That's brilliant. I'm going to start giving that to another patient that I can think of.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of benefits to it, but the original reason I got into it was because it's as effective as citicoline is, which is the gold standard treatment for dementia. And it works in the same way for acetylcholine support.
Beautiful. Well, I'm glad I'm taking that on the daily.
Great for memory, great for bile production, great for detoxification at that moment in time. And again, what we'd also look at is the up and down. And again, up is going to try and support, and you take this in the morning, your focus and concentration. And we're looking at it to try and actually help inhibit and bring people's focus into the moment and get them enough energy to actually be able to get their brain to look at one thing at a time, because low energy will cause people to become vastly more vigilant. So the more fatigued you are, the more you've got to be worried that you can actually defend yourself against things. On the flip side, down is essential for driving serotonin, melatonin, and GABA function, and it helps inhibit to bring you down into a deeper state of sleep. So again, anti-anxiety. So GABA is the neurotransmitter we release to decrease anxiety in the brain. So if we can help you produce more of that, we actually get a calmer state of brain, and we try and drive you into a deeper state of sleep and stay there so you can wake up more refreshed. So a lot of this stuff, no matter what we're talking about, sleep is a major component. And if you've got poor sleep hygiene, which is where a lot of this blue light stimulus comes in, you're not going to do so well.
I was going to jump in there. I took a good dose of Brain Down last night, and I have found that when I take Brain Down, I dream more vividly.
Oh, good.
And last night, I had a dream that I was Indiana Jones, and it was fucking awesome. So I'd like to thank you for that. That was a wonderful, wonderful dream to have.
That was most welcome. That was totally unintentional. And just in case anyone's listening, results may vary.
So, like, there's not any specific chemical that you're putting in there to promote Indiana Jones dreams?
Not at all. But
mate, if you could do that, that would be that would be
awesome.
good money.
The benefit is, of course, that suggests that you're actually getting into a rapid eye movement phase of sleep. So you're getting mind repair and allowing kind of dreaming to actually occur. So this is a really positive sign.
And is that when you're getting that active and the rapid eye movement, I'm guessing that's when most of the brain repair, lymphatic drainage will happen?
That certainly appears to be the case. No. So when we have the initial phases of sleep, what we're tending to be doing more is body repair. And so in the roughly 5 sleep cycles that a person will do, in the first 2 to 3, you're doing more body repair with less brain repair. And the more we kind of progress through the night, the more that shifts from body repair to more mind-brain neurological repair. And so
that's why cutting it short at 6 hours is not going to do your brain any good. You need
correct.
That full 9 to get that last cycle.
That's exactly it.
I think our next podcast, we have a good old chat about sleep hygiene.
Absolutely awesome. I love it. That's a good thing. Everyone needs to sleep better.
So if we were to summarize the podcast, whether you've got high cholesterol and you're about to have a stint, or you've got depression, or we've got some TBI and some EMF radiation issues happening, the end result is whatever you need to do, get the inflammation under control.
That's absolutely the case.
That's the common factor. And GPC turns out like it's amazing for that.
It is.
So if anyone listening has any questions or wants any of these magical supplements from Dr. Scotty, call 0733710222. You can get in touch with Scotty. Mate, any closing remarks?
Well, I just got triggered on the whole getting a stent on cholesterol. You got to actually look at the statistics on how effective those damn things are. Not so good for changing mortality.
No. And I think we have, if people want to go back through our podcast library, because now that we have 18 episodes, I can say that we've got a library.
That's awesome.
I think it was one of our earlier ones. We certainly hit that nail on the head pretty hard.
So other thoughts, get your sleep under control. We'll talk about sleep hygiene next. Keep inflammation under control and try and do things that help you live in the moment, which is, again, a shout out to Jerome for changing my life. Mr. Linders.
BJJ.
Yeah, absolutely was awesome for helping me live a much more in the moment lifestyle and keeping stress under control. I cannot recommend that enough. It might not be for everyone, but no matter what, everyone needs to do something that helps them live in the present, not in the future, not in the past. Anxiety, no matter what, is always going to be created when you're not actually being in a present time consciousness.
Mate, well said.
Thank you.
All right, I think we wrap this up. Thank you for listening, people. We'll see you next week.
Have a great day.
Thank you for watching. To learn more from Dr. Scott, visit our site at optihuman.com.au.